All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Let us begin. Baruch Hashem, a lot to do today. Begin by thanking all of our shiur sponsors. So thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating the shiurim this drushas this month in honor of all of their grandchildren. May they, Meretz Hashem, grow to become the best version of themselves. We thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors, the Chevra from the Daf Yomi shiur, for dedicating all the shiurim and drushos this month in the schus of refuah shlema for Yehuda Ben Michal, son of our devoted maggidei and shiur member of Kalman Akiva Kovacs. We hope that he has a refuah shlema b'karov. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Bill and Raizy Eskin, for dedicating the shiurim l'zecher nishmas, Bill's father, Mordechai ben Dovid, Raizy's mother, Tzvyah bas Moshe Aron. And to thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Milton and Melanie Gertner, in honor of the 10th anniversary of many members of the shiur who began the last cycle. Really, it's been 10 years. Today's the 10-year anniversary? Wow, incredible. 10-year anniversary of our shiur, Baruch Hashem. Many thanks to all of the maggidei shiur, and also a thank you to the past, present, future members of the shiur who give us chizuk and show up and learn each and every day. Wow, a beautiful, beautiful milestone. Thank you, Milt, for reminding us, and we should be zocheh to learn together for many, many years to come. And also with that, let us begin. Today's daf is daf Chav Ches, but you would not know that from where we are starting today. So I'll say we are picking up Meretz Hashem on Daf Chav Zayin on the base, but it's going to go quickly. 27b. I'm sorry? Yeah, it's true. 27b, and we are picking up at the two dots of Va'afilu Shivcha Dida. I'm sorry. Im Yesh Eid Mafilu Evet Va'afilu Shivcha. It's right across in Tosfos Amar. So Moshe, remember again, just to orient ourselves a little bit. So we're talking about over here in the Mishnah that we saw about a city that was surrounded by an invading army. So there's an assumption that the women inside of the city are violated. Halacha l'maisa, if a woman makes the claim that she wasn't violated, that claim by itself would not be enough to attest to the fact that she wasn't violated. But halacha l'maisa, the Mishnah says, if there's an aid echad, if there's an aid, even if the aid is a shivcha, a maidservant, then ultimately, again, that is enough to solidify the woman's status. So the Gemara says, really, Ba'afilu shivcha dida, is it true that even a woman's own shivcha is believed? Or meaning, there is a question, the Gemara says, Lo tisyachi dimos. We'll say, just to give you context of this case over here. The halacha that we're dealing with is, a man gives his wife a get. Rashi points out over here, this is what's called a get shchivura. A man is on his deathbed, he gives his wife a get. Now, again, what's the point? Now, this get is going to be chal retroactively a moment before he dies. So he's giving her the get now, it'll take effect a moment before I die, put a retroactivity clause in a get, and the whole point of this is to save her from yibum. The halacha is always saying that after he gives her this get, he's not allowed to be alone with her. Because the concern is you get into a situation of what's called a get yashan, an old get. So the Gemara says, Lo tisyachi imo, after he gives her this get, he's not allowed to be alone with her. She's not allowed to be ela al pi edim. Of course, unless there are witnesses. In other words, if there are witnesses, then of course they're not alone. But technically speaking, if there are witnesses who could attest that halacha l'maisa, nothing occurred between the two of them, that would be fine. So the Gemara says, Va'afilu al pi evet, va'afilu al pi shivcha, chutz mishivchasa. Obviously, the exception is her maidservant would not work for these purposes. Why? Mipnei shaliba gasba. Mipnei shaliba gasba shivchasa. Now we'll say, because a woman is very comfortable around her own shivcha. What does that mean? See, we'll say, what's the point of having eidos? The point of having eidos is, if the husband and wife are alone, and ultimately, again, there's someone else there, they're not going to have relations with each other. The concern, the Gemara says, is that a woman is very comfortable in front of her maidservant, and would even feel comfortable engaging in relations in the presence of her maidservant. Therefore, the maidservant does not go ahead and serve as a deterrent. So you see from here that a woman has an especially close relationship with her own maidservant, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, her testimony shouldn't count. Amra papi, b'shvuya hikil. Papi says, no, you're right. In general, that's true. but remember we've seen this already a number of different times, that by shvuya, in this case of captivity, again, this is not literally captivity, but we kind of put this under the umbrella of captivity. Chazal were makel and allow you to even believe the testimony of her maidservant. That's Rav Papi's position, that this is a unique leniency, ultimately, again, by shvuya. Papa says, habeshif chadida, habeshif chadidei. That Papa says, it depends who's maidservant. When is there no credibility? That's with her own maidservant. With his maidservant, ultimately, again, she could serve in this Eidos capacity. Is that true that her shifcha is not believed? Hakatani, ein adin meid al atzmo. A person in general is not permitted, is not believed to go ahead and give testimony on their own behalf. However, hashifcha dida mehenna. Ultimately, but her shifcha would be believed. So it would seem to indicate that her shifcha does have credibility. Shifchasa nami ka'atzmadami. Now, both say a woman's shifcha is like an extension of herself. So you begin to see Chazal painting this picture that there is this close relationship between a woman and her maidservant, and therefore in issues of testimony or credibility, the maidservant is no different than the woman herself. Ravashi says, Hava hava shifcha dida. Ravashi gives an interesting interpretation. He says he rejects this idea that some cases are talking about his maidservant, her maidservant. All the cases in question are talking about her maidservant. And I will say this is fascinating. Mechsa chaz, the Gemara says v'shivcha, mechsa chazya v'shaska. See, I will say, what's the problem with a shivcha? A shivcha sometimes will see things, but will remain silent. Or remain silent. So she'll see something, and she won't testify, or she won't say anything about that which she saw. So Hassam, in the get case that we saw before, Dishtikasa matirasa, we're simply remaining silent. Ultimately, again, is what permits the woman, lo mehemna. The shivcha is not believed. Hacha, but in our case over here, again, of the surrounding army, if we're concerned that she was violated, hacha, dishtikasa sarta mehemna. In our case over here, where if the shivcha is silent, then remember what happens. The chazaka that the woman was violated sets in, and halacha l'maisa she'll become prohibited. So therefore, again, Abba say when the shivcha goes ahead and gives testimony, ultimately she is believed. Says the Gemara, hashtanami asyo mishakra. Why shouldn't we be concerned over here that maybe she's going to come and she's going to lie? She's going to say, my mistress wasn't violated when in fact she was. Abba say, this is incredible. Tarti lo avda. Abba say, the maidservant will not do two things. We'll say, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. This is actually incredible. I'm sorry, by the way, we're concerned that maybe she's going to lie in the get case. We'll say we assume like this. A maidservant is not going to do two things. In other words, she doesn't remain silent and ultimately what? Also lie. In other words, what a shifcha will do is in part of her capacity as a shifcha, she'll see stuff and what? Keep quiet. She won't say anything. But she's not going to lie. That's not. So in other words, I will say it's interesting. She'll lie. I guess what we'll call how do they term it? Lie by omission. Right? She'll lie by omission, or she'll lie by silence. But she will not go ahead and actively share an untruth. That's tarti lo avda. We'll also listen to this story. Kihad Mari bar Isik. This is an incredible story. Mari bar Isik. Va'amrli Chana bar Isik. So it was a guy. Mari bar Isik. Some say his name was Chana bar Isik. And what happens? Listen to this. So asa le'acha mi bechoza. Amrli plog li benichse abba. So we'll say, here's the context of the story. Look at Rashi. It's not so far. It's across and a little bit up. Acha mi bechoza. So we'll say this guy. We'll just go with Mari bar Isik. Mari bar Isik is living his life. What happens? One day, a guy shows up claiming to be his brother, Mari's brother. So I'll say, look at Rashi. So I'll say, here's the case. Mari's father, let's take a step back. Mari had a brother. He did have a brother, right? His parents, I don't know what happened. Maybe his parents divorced, the father relocated. Father went to live somewhere else, specifically again in a place of Chozah, right? Father went to Beit Chozah to go ahead and live with his brother. Mari lost contact with his brother. Okay? Father dies. There's an estate to be divided. Guess who shows up? Mari's brother. Right? Mari's brother shows up and says, "Hi, Mari, I'm back. So sorry to hear about that. Let's get down to business. Let's split the estate." So what happens? Mari says, "Who are you? Who? Or in other words, okay, Shalom Aleichem. You're claiming you're my brother. I don't recognize you. I don't know you." So the Gemara, so they brought the case before Rav Chisda. So Moshe says, here's what you have. You have the brother, the quote-unquote brother, and what is the brother claiming? What is the brother claiming? We'll call it 50% of the estate, or whatever, some portion of the estate. Mari claiming, listen, I just don't know who you are. So they come before Rav Chisda. So Rav Chisda says to the brother, Mari's saying good. He's saying he doesn't recognize you. After all, the Chsiv, Vayaker Yosef Esecha V'hem Lo Kiru Melame Shiyatza V'lo Chasima Zaken Baba Chasima Zaken. So Moshe says what happened. The pasuk says, right in Bereshis, that Yosef had become the viceroy of Egypt. Yosef recognized his brothers. They did not recognize him. Why did they not recognize him? Why not? Because he left as a young man. Literally translated, he left without a beard, and now he had a beard. In other words, Yosef left the familial home when he was a young boy, 17 years old. So the Maisa, now he was a man, so they just didn't recognize him. The point that Rav Chisda was trying to make was what? That it's possible for brothers who are really real brothers not to recognize each other. It's possible. To which the Gemara says, so therefore Rav Chisda says to the brother, Amar le, Zil Aisi Sahadi Da'achua'at. You have to produce witnesses that you are really Mari's brother. That's what you have to do. So in other words, Rav Chisda was saying, brother, the burden of proof is upon you to prove that you're really Mari's brother. Amar le, so listen to this. So the brother says, Isli Sahadi umistafinu mine digavra almahu. I have witnesses. Here's the problem. My witnesses are scared to show up and testify in Beis Din. Why? Because Mari was very powerful. And so they're scared that if they come to go ahead and testify in Beis Din, that there's going to be some type of negative reciprocity upon them. So Amarle Levide, Zilai Sinu Ad Delav Achochu. So say this is fascinating. So Rav Chisda turns to Mari and he says to Mari, okay, Mari, you have to bring witnesses that this guy is not your brother. So Amrle, Dina Hachi, Chevra says, interesting, you can imagine this discussion. Mari says to Rav Chisda, like, I mean no disrespect, but are you sure that's the halacha? After all, Hamotzi Mechaveira Alav Haraya. Rabbi say the truth is, this is like an open and shut case. This really is an open and shut case, right? At the end of the day, guy is showing up, brother showing up, saying, "Hi, I'm here. I want 50% of the estate." Right? Mari, you take him at his word that he doesn't recognize the brother. Okay, in general in halacha, whenever you want to extract money, the burden of proof is always on the extractor. So now Rav Chisda comes along and totally flips the responsibility and says to Mari, no, the burden of proof is upon you to prove that this guy's not your brother. First of all, I'll say, if you think about that, the threshold of proving someone is not your brother is definitely higher than proving someone is your brother. Right? In other words, I'll say, what do I need to prove that someone is my... I guess the truth is, it's not so far off. What do I need to prove that someone is my brother? Right? I need to prove really my paternity. Right? My brother and my father. At least my father. This is Yerusha. So I guess to prove that someone's not your brother, you'd have to prove that someone other than your father is that person's father. Okay, the point that Mari says is, Rav Chisda, that's not the halacha. So we'll say, this is actually fascinating. Amarle, hachi de'inina lach ulekulhu al mi chaverach. Hashtanami asar, we'll say, the Gemara says, Rav Chisda says, the truth is you're right, but this is what I do for you and all of your friends like you. I will say, what does it mean for you and your... For all of you guys, so Rav Chisda says, Mari, you and all of your wealthy, powerful friends, this is the way it has to work. Now I will say, Rav Chisda wasn't being punitive over here. What Rav Chisda was saying is, there's a problem. Because people are reticent to come and testify against wealthy, powerful people out of fear of reciprocity. So Rav Chisda says, in these kind of cases, there's no choice but to flip the onus. So I have to place the onus of responsibility upon you, Rami, and therefore again you have the obligation to go ahead and furnish the edus that this guy is not your brother. The Gemara says, Hashtanami asu mishakri. Aren't we concerned over here also that witnesses will go ahead and show up and lie? In other words, it will say, if we've established that people are afraid of Mari, and people are afraid of this guy Mari because he's wealthy and because he's powerful, aren't we concerned that witnesses are going to show up and lie? To which the Gemara says, Tarti lo abdi. So this is actually very interesting. The Gemara says, in general, we're not really scared that witnesses come and outright lie. What we're normally nervous about is that people know testimony and just don't say anything. That's what we're nervous about. They have information and they just omit or they just remain silent. But to be concerned that halacha l'maaseh they actually go ahead and actively lie, that we're not so concerned about. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, so lema ketanai. Rabbi says, must be a machlokes tanaim. Here we go. So the Gemara says, zu eidos ish, zu, in this case, Rabbi say, in this eidos, Rashi says over here, it refers to the eidos of Shavuya. Remember again, in our topic right now, what we are discussing is, under normal circumstances, if a city is surrounded by an invading army, there's a chazaka. What's the chazaka? That the women inside of the city have been violated. That's the chazaka. So the Gemara says, however, you could have eidos, someone could testify on behalf of the woman that she has not been violated. So the Gemara says, zu eidos, this type of eidos, ish v'isha, a man could give it, a woman could give it, tinok v'tinokes, children, aviha v'ima, even her own mother or her father, v'achia v'achio, so her brother or her sister, avalo b'na ubita, but not her son or not her daughter, lo avdo v'lo shivchasa, and not her servant or her maidservant. So I will say, here you have a brisa that says, the maidservant is not believed. V'tanya idach, another brisa that says, hakol ne'eman l'ha'id, everyone is believed to go to testify on behalf of a shvuya, chutz mehemna ubayla, except for the woman herself and her husband. So the Gemara says about side. So the second brisa says that even who's believed? Who's believed? A shivcha. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Rav Papi v'Rav Ashi tanaihi. They both say, based on the opinions we mentioned before of Rav Papi and Rav Ashi, they would agree that this is a machlokes tanaim. Rav Papa mile matanaihi. Would Rav Papa agree? We'll say first wide line chavzayin amud beis. Would Rav Papa hold that it's a machlokes tanaim? Amal Rav Papa kitanga hahi b'masicha lefi tuma. Oh, they both say, here we go. Rav Papa says it could be that there is a situation of a shivcha where the shivcha would be believed, her own shivcha. When? Rabbi is saying the concept of masiach lefi tuma. We've seen this already a couple of times. What's masiach lefi tuma? See, Rabbi is saying there's a difference between when a person gives directed testimony, right? A person shows up and they say, I'm here to act in a testimonial capacity, versus when a person just shares unsolicited information. That's called masiach lefi tuma. I'm just conversing. There is a power in halacha to masiach lefi tuma, because since it's unsolicited and a person is just giving information of their own volition, there's a certain inherent level of credibility that's attached to that statement. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Ki ha'dichi asra abdini amrav chanan kartigno mishtoi ma'isa v'alefni Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. It was a story that came from Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Formerly Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi mishtoi ma'isa, this Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi conveyed the ma'isa. Balefni Rebbe, some say came before Rebbe. But adam echad shemasiach lefi tumo. There was a guy, and this guy was just conversing. What was he saying? Va'amar ani ve'imi, me and my mother and I, nishpinu lebeina ovdei kohalim. We were taken captive. Yatsasi l'shov mayim, when I would leave my mother to go ahead and draw water. Daiti al imi. I was always had my eye, literally my mind and my mother, meaning I was always vigilant regarding my mother. The lakev eitzim, to collect wood. Daiti al imi. I was thinking about my mother. I would say, what was the son saying over here? What was the son saying? That I never let my mother out of my sight the whole time I was in. I will say, here's what's interesting. What happened? The si Rebbe l'kunafiv. Rebbe allowed this woman, apparently her husband died, right? Rebbe allowed this woman to marry a Kohen based on the testimony of a son. Now, I will say, we just got finished saying what? That normally the testimony of a son is not believed, bless you, is not believed to go ahead and maintain the kasher status, or maintain the status of his mother. Yet Rabbi say, so why is the son believed in this case? Why? Masiach lefi tumo. So Rabbi say, what you begin to see, and this is how the Gemara ends, is that there's grounds to say that her own maidservant should not be believed. Because since there's a very close relationship between a woman and her maidservant, there's a concern that the maidservant may lie, may omit, may lie on her behalf. But what we begin to see, and therefore again, there's a whole group of people whose testimony is not believed. But also it's fascinating to see is that even in situations where someone's testimony is not believed, if the testimony is not testimony at all, rather what? Information, which is just conveyed in a normal course of conversation, in halacha l'maisa, it can be accepted as credible evidence as well. Incredible. Mishnah. Rabbi Chaim ben Akatzav said, Hama'on hazeh. We'll say Hama'on hazeh is the Lashon Rashi says of Shavua. Literally, again, I swear by the Beis HaMikdash. The Bible should be Zocha. I swear by the Beis HaMikdash. Lo zaza yada mitoch yadi. Misha shenichnasu ovdei gacham Yerushalayim va'ad sheyatzu. So I will say, listen to this story. Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav was living in Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim Kodesh, and there were invaders. Like there was an army that came in and invaded Yerushalayim. Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav is testifying about his own wife, and he's saying, literally, I held her hand. I mean, that's literally, but I held her hand the entire time, from the time that the invaders came into the city until they left. What was he testifying to? What was he testifying to? My wife was not violated by any of the invading soldiers. She was with me the entire time. So the Gemara says, Amrulo ein adam meid al atzmo. They said to Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav, ultimately again, a person cannot testify on his own behalf. The idea being ishto kigufo, one's wife is an extension of themselves, and the same way that I'm not generally believed to give edus regarding myself, says Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav said he's not believed regarding giving edus about his wife. So the Gemara says, Tana, this is incredible. The Afapi came, Yichela Bayis Bechatzero. Shavuot said, this is pretty wild. So remember, Rashi points out a very important piece of information over here, which is, Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav was a Kohen. He was a Kohen. Shavuot said, what's the halacha at the end of the day? What's the halacha if the wife of a Kohen is violated? What's the halacha? The halacha is she is asur to him. Shavuot say, again, I just want to point out, like, we're reading this story just in a little bit of like a halachically detached way, but what a tragic story. Here it is. Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav, right in Yerushalayim Kodesh is invaded, and he's testifying about his wife. She's TORAH. Her hand was in mine the entire time. Nothing happened. And again, the halachic process is the halachic process, and they say to him, "Look, we appreciate what you're saying, but that's not the kind of eidos that's going to help." So therefore, we'll say, what happens? Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav and his wife can no longer live together as husband and wife. She becomes prohibited to him. So the Gemara says, we'll say, it's just incredible. The Gemara says, Tana, the Afapi came, even though they could not live together anymore as husband and wife, Yichela Bayis Bechatzero. She had her own home in his chatzar. In other words, I will say, he did not want to dissolve the family unit. He didn't want to dissolve the family unit. So they couldn't live together as husband and wife. But apparently they will say, it sounds like they didn't divorce either. That's what it sounds like. They just didn't live together. And ultimately, again, she had a home in the chutzner. Right, the Gemara goes on, Kishi Yotza, when she would leave, Kishi Yotze Barosh Banah, or Kishi Nichneses Besof Banah. So we'll say literally what it means is, when they would be leaving the house, she would leave before the children, and when they were all together, and when they would come back into the house, the children would come in first. What's the idea? The idea being is they wanted to avoid yichud. Rabbi Zechariah and his wife could not be alone together, because there's an Isser yichud. You're not allowed to be alone with any woman if the woman is prohibited to you. His wife was prohibited to him. So the Gemara just says they had to make sure to always have the children present. Always have the children. Let's say, I'll just point out that, the power of a story like this is that sometimes when we have churban, like when Klal Yisrael experiences destruction, so the destruction is felt long after the enemies leave the city. There's collateral damage. There's always collateral damage. And I'll tell you, like, lahavdil, they have studies upon studies of children, very first generation and second generation offspring of Holocaust survivors. So I remember my mother, she lived with me well, told me that when she was a child growing up, she had a kid in her class. Although was born in the DP camps after the war. When they came to America, she had a child in her class who always wore shoes that were 2 sizes too big. No one understood it. No one understood it. So it turned out everybody was survivors. During the war, if you didn't have shoes, you were done. So the parents of this child had a chachma. They said, maybe someone like the Nazis, going to come back again. This way, if my child has shoes that are big right now, if they have to run, they have to flee, they'll have room to grow into the shoes. Let's say you think about what does it mean to be a child who always wears shoes? I know in the grand scheme of things, wearing shoes that are too big doesn't seem to be but there's baggage. Even once the invaders leave the city, there's collateral damage that continues to play out over the course of years. What a tragic story. Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav and his wife lose their ability to live together as a normal family. Right? Why? Because of invaders in Yerushalayim. It's just overwhelming. Let's say to their credit, what you begin to see something amazing, is that sometimes within a marriage, you just gotta figure things out for the sake of the kids. Right? Sometimes, again, things aren't perfect, but Lamaisa, there's a responsibility to a mishpacha. Pretty incredible. Bai brings down. What about, so let's say, this is a case, just want to point out, so the unique aspect of this case is, Rabbi Zechariah and his wife are married, right? She's asura to him now. They're not divorced. So they're still married. They're not allowed to live together. So they have to avoid yichud. Okay, would this work in a divorce case? Let's say a couple gets divorced, but Lamaisa, they want to co-parent effectively. So they have this great idea. What's the great idea? Let's live together in the same chutzner, right? Not in the same house, obviously. So, grusha king. So, can you go ahead and do this with a grusha? Rashi says, Kohen shegirish ishto mahu loder imo b'chutzner. Shabbos say this is a Kohen. Now, why is Rashi framing this as a Kohen who divorces his wife? Right? Why? Because let's say he can't remarry her. As opposed to, remember again, if Yisrael divorces his wife, as long as she had not married someone else in the interim, you could remarry your divorcee. A Kohen can't. A Kohen divorces his wife. Okay, we want to co-parent effectively. It was an amicable divorce. So can we live together in the same chutzner? So the Gemara says, Hasamhu debishvuyi hekilu hachalo. So also we could say maybe not. Maybe this is dafka a kula by shvuya. Right? This is a kula. Like we have many kulas by shvuya. There's another kula by shvuya. But in a case of divorce, no. O dilma lo shno. Or maybe no. Maybe again halacha lemaisa. As long as you're careful to avoid yichud, it should be okay. So Tashma, let's analyze this sanya. Hamagarish ishto. If a man divorces his wife, lo tinase bishchunaso. Now, what's is actually an interesting case? If the woman remarries, right, the remarried wife should not live in the same neighborhood as her ex-husband. It's a concept like this, that a divorced couple, once she is remarried, should not live in the same neighborhood. What's wrong with that? Look at Rashi. Lo tinase b'shchunaso, lefisha makira beremizosav ukaritzosav, shema yavoli de'avera. Because we'll say, Chazal work is from like this. Once a couple was married and had an intimate relationship, so even though now they're divorced and they are remarried, right? The woman's remarried in this case. Halacha Maisa, we're concerned that if they live in close proximity to each other, that could reawaken the feelings of intimacy. So therefore, interestingly enough, once she gets remarried, they should not live in the same neighborhood. Top of Chavchas, Vim Haya Kohen, they will say if he was a Kohen. Now, again, remember, the distinction between the Kohen case and the Yisrael case is, this halacha is only triggered by a Yisrael when the ex-wife remarries. Because now she becomes asura to her husband. By a Kohen, the Isra is triggered when? Immediately upon divorce. So if it was a Kohen, then even if she didn't remarry, but they're divorced, those sidar imo b'mavui, they should not go ahead and live in the same mavui. Rashi says, Shema yavo alav v'kohen asa b'grusha. Good. V'im haya kfar katan, what happens if it was a small village, a small village? So zeh haya ma'isa v'amru kfar katan nidan kishchuna, that a small village, ultimately again, is like a neighborhood. It's like a neighborhood. So we'll say, so you begin to see something very interesting, which is that halacha l'maisa, what Rabbi Zechariah ben Akatzav did, living with his wife, who was asura to him in the same chutzner, was dafka a kula by shvuya. But in a case of divorce, the moment the divorcee, the moment the ex-wife becomes prohibited to her husband, which is in the case of a Yisrael when she gets remarried, or in the case ultimately again of a Kohen immediately upon divorce, they cannot live in the same neighborhood with each other. Out of a concern, they may come to be intimate with each other. So we'll say, now listen to this. Okay, so here's the $1 million question. Mi nitchen mitnei mi. Who has to move? Who has to move? Okay, so now we establish when she becomes asura, so they can't live together in the same neighborhood. Who has to move? So Tashma Desanya, he nitchis mipanav. She has to move. Ve'in hu nitcha mipanav. She has to move literally again. She's displaced in front of him. He's not displaced in front of her. However, of course again, halacha lamaisa, if it's her chatzar, right, if it's her chatzar, then he's gotta go. Say bailahu, here's the kasha. Chatzar shel haisa chatzar shel shnei mahu. What happens if it's jointly owned property? I suppose it's obviously what's going to have to happen over here. Someone's going to have to buy out someone. But the shaila is, who has the right to remain in the home and who has to relocate? So Tashma, he nitchis mipanav. So we'll say, what did we say before? Right? How did this discussion begin? The discussion began with a statement that she is displaced and not him. In other words, she has to move and not him. So what's the case? When we made that statement, what case are we referring to? What am I asking on? If it's his chatzar, pshita. Obviously, if it's his property, then of course she's the one who has to leave and he's the one who's able to stay. Rather, it must be her chatzar. That can't be vatanya. We'll say if it's her chatzar, then obviously he has every right to stay put. Elalav ki hai gavna. We'll say must be that what? What's the case? What's the case where the Brisa said before that she has to leave and he can remain in the home? It must be a case of jointly owned property. Right? So you see that in the case of jointly owned property, he has the right to remain and she has to leave. Tushim says maybe not. Dilma da'agir megar. Maybe not. Maybe at the end of the both side, that's the case of where they're renters. Right? Now remember, if they're renting, what does that mean? Neither has a greater active claim. Maybe that's the case where he gets to stay and she has to leave. So we'll say, my havi Allah. So we'll say, so bottom line, what's the... So remember again, we have two definitive cases. What are the two definitive cases? Obviously, if it's his property, then what? He's staying. If it's her property, then what? She's staying. So there are two cases that we don't know about. Okay? Either a case of where they're renters, who gets to remain in the home and who has to leave, or when there's jointly owned property, who gets to stay. Obviously, they have to buy out the other party, but who gets to stay. So we'll say, this is actually incredible. And we'll say, the Gemara says, Tashma, listen to this. Hine Hashem taltalecha taltala gever va'otcha to abosayim. The Gemara quotes the pasuk from Yeshaya, and the pasuk in Yeshaya says, Hashem will cause you to wander the way a man wanders. So this is a punishment for Klal Yisrael. You're going to have to wander like the wandering of a man. What do you see from here? Va'amarav tiltule gavra kashin mide isisa. He'll say it is more difficult for a man to wander than it is for a woman. So it's actually a profound statement. Chazal seemed to feel that women have a better ability to adjust to new circumstances than men do. Right? Women have the ability to adapt to change better than men do. And after the dissolution of a marriage, where there's so much potential turmoil, so much potential change, let the man have the level of stability by remaining in the home, as this will allow him to rebound better, and the woman who is more adept in change ultimately again could move somewhere else. Fascinating. Good. So we'll say now again, these halachas of course are more complicated than the way they're being mentioned over here, as there could be other factors at play as well. Someone's livelihood, family situations that of course go into all this. But if we're just looking at this as a property dispute, who gets to live in the house, these are the circumstances. Good. Tanur Rabbanan. So we'll say more have the halachos of etiquette when a couple divorces. Tanur Rabbanan. Lo v'heimenu b'nichse aviyah, eino nifras ela ayidei acher. We'll say, let's say, over the course of the marriage, the husband borrowed from his wife's estate. Right? The wife has her own money. Let's say she inherited stuff from her father. He borrowed money from her father's estate. So now they're divorced. He has to pay her back. What's the halacha? He should not pay her back directly. Instead, he should pay her back through an intermediary, through a third party. And we'll say, what do you see in halacha over here? What's happening over here is, in these situations, is we want to limit contact, unnecessary contact, out of a fear of intimacy. Out of a fear of intimacy. Now, I will say, now again, these are all talking about situations where halacha l'maisa, she remarried, she's an Eishes Kohen. The idea being over here is we limit contact. Amr of Sheshes, v'asul l'kamal l'dina, lo mizdaknin le. Listen to lo mizdaknin le. Rav Sheshes says, and by the way, if an ex-wife and an ex-husband show up, the two of them to din, we will not hear their case in a beis din. In other words, it's not even appropriate for them to adjudicate cases directly. Right? There should be a third party who then represents them. Interesting. We excommunicate them. In other words, we're both saying we don't want a level of connection between the ex-wife and the ex-husband. This is not talking about in terms of like co-parenting or things like that. The idea being that we're concerned that if they're interacting with each other, ultimately again, this could lead to intimacy. Rav Humber de Yeshua Amar, Nagude nami minagdinan lahu. We'll flog them. In other words, the idea being is we don't want unnecessary interactions that can't be handled by third parties. Amr Rav Nachman, Tana be'evor Abbasi, we learned. But when is this true? I will say, when is this true that the halacha feels the need to really place a separation between an ex-husband and an ex-wife? Only when a couple divorced after nisuin. Why did I both say? Because after nisuin, then what? They were intimate with each other. So because they were intimate with each other, there's a bond. And they understand each other, and they understand each other's cues and behaviors. And there is a concern that halacha l'maisa, if there is still ongoing involvement between the two of them, that halacha l'maisa, they could reawaken that spark of intimacy, which again, if she's remarried, or ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa, he's a Kohen, is halachically problematic. Aval kishin iskarsha min ha'irisin, but halacha l'maisa, when they were divorced from irisin, nifras al yidei atzma. Then I will say, going back to, let's say, the debt repayment case, he can repay her back directly. Why? She'ein libo gaspa. Because there's no connection. When we say there's no connection, what does that mean? What does that mean? There's no intimate connection. Because remember, we're assuming from Erisin, there's no intimacy. They didn't live together as husband and wife. And therefore, we're not concerned about anything illicit happening. So Gemara tells a story. Hahu aros varosaso, daslo kamei derava. There was a aros and an aros, right? A man and woman, ultimately, again, who had Erisin, got divorced from Erisin. We came before Rava. Yosef Rav Adabar Masla Kamei. Uki Rava Shlucha Ben Saihu. So Rava went ahead and said, okay, I'm not adjudicating this case, right? I want there to be a third party that's representing one of you, because I don't want the two of you interacting together in the Din Torah. But one second, Rav Nachman said before that this halacha only applies to a couple who divorced from Yisuin, not a couple divorced from Eris, and Abbas is incredible. So Rava said, I see that they're a bit familiar with each other. So in other words, I see that even though they got divorced from Erisin, it looks like they knew each other intimately. You're both say, by the way, you saw this. You saw, right, where is the possibility for this to have happened? In Yehuda, right? We saw that again at certain locales where the Chassan and Kala were encouraged to be together during Erisin. It's quite possible they were intimate with each other. Others said, alternate version of the story, Lo uki Rava shliach bad ben Isayu, that this Aras and Arusa came before Rava, and Rava did not set up a third party to adjudicate their dispute. So Rava Bar Masna asked on him, Rava, how are you allowing to go ahead and adjudicate the case just the two of them? Okay, so we'll say alternate version of the story, but same basic idea, which is ultimately Rava perceived that they were very familiar with each other, and therefore halacha l'maisa wanted there to be a third party to adjudicate the case. Incredible. Says the Mishnah, Ve'ilu ne'aman laha'id begodlon mashera'u b'kartan. Rabbi said it's a fascinating case. There are times, listen to this, where a person could give testimony as an adult based on something he experienced as a child. So in this case, you have an adult giving testimony, but he's testifying about something that he saw, that he witnessed in his childhood. What are some examples of this? Soon a person is believed to say, this is my father's handwriting. I will say this could be a case of where the father passed away when he was a kid. The child was a kid. Right? So therefore, again, he's testifying about something that he saw as a child. Or Zek Sav Yado Shel Rabbi. This is the handwriting of my Rebbe. V'zek sav yado shel achid. This is the handwriting of my brother. Or he could say, Zochra yisi beplonis sheyatza behenuma v'rosha parua. I remember that so-and-so when she got married, Rachel when she got married, she went out with her hair down, wearing a veil. Now we'll say hair down, wearing a veil was how besulas. If one was a besula, that's how she dressed when she got married. V'shahaya ish ploni yotzei beis hasefer. Listen to this. A person is also believed to testify. I remember as a kid in school that Aaron would leave school, litbal le'echol truma. And Aaron would leave school to go to the mikvah, right? Leave school to go to the mikvah and eat truma. And similarly, again, a person is believed to say, I remember as a kid, Aaron used to receive truma with us at the threshing floor. A person is believed to say, this field is a beis hapras. So let's remember again, we know beis hapras is a field in which we know there was a grave, but we don't know the location of the grave because it was plowed over. A person is also believed to say, up until here we used to travel on Shabbos, which is another way of saying what? The tchum, Shabbos boundary goes until here. Aval in, I will say second wide line. Aval in adam ne'ema lomar derech chaya leploni b'makom hazeh. So I will say, listen to this. But a person is not believed to say that I remember as a child, so and so always had a rite of passage on this field. Why, Rabbi say? Why not? Because remember, saying that someone has a rite of passage is a monetary claim. You are not believed to testify as an adult based on something you saw as a child regarding a monetary claim. Or similarly, Maimad u'mispat halil leploni b'makom hazeh. Similarly, again, Rabbi say, Maimad u'mispat means that halacha l'maisa. We saw this in Moed Katan. They used to have a custom that when taking the coffin, or taking the funeral bier to the cemetery, they would stop at certain places and eulogize the mace in those places. So an adult is not permitted to say that, is not believed to say, I remember as a child, they used to use this spot as for eulogies. Because I will say, once again, that's a monetary claim. What you're claiming is that field or that spot belongs to someone or doesn't belong to someone. So I will say, therefore, what you begin to see is something really amazing. So halacha l'maisa, we're introduced to the concept that an adult is believed to go ahead and give testimony regarding certain things that he experienced as a child. But however, when it comes to monetary claims, that type of testimony is not believable at all. So let's go back. Let's go. Says the Gemara. Amra from Rabbi Yeshua, v'hu gadol imo. So this is very interesting. If Rabbi Yeshua says, by the way, when we say that an adult is believed to go ahead and give testimony of something that he experienced as a child, that's assuming what? There's someone else giving there's another adult giving testimony about the same thing along with him. In other words, that you have a regular witness. You have a regular witness. So I have one regular witness to whatever it is, and then the second witness is me, but I haven't seen it in my adult life. I saw it in my childhood. So something I saw in my childhood that I'm attesting to now, I could combine with another aid, and we could form a testimonial unit. So it says the Gemara, Tzvyah. And here's what's interesting. The Mishnah begins with three of the same case. This is my father's handwriting. This is my Rebbe's handwriting. This is my brother's handwriting. I got it. You could attest to handwriting that you saw as a kid. You could attest in your adult life. Why in three different cases? Tzvyah, I'll tell you why. I understand why I could testify about my father's handwriting, even though I only saw it in my childhood. Because why? Because the son is around his father a lot. So he's able to see the handwriting. Aval Rabo lo. But my Rebbe, who says I recognize my Rebbe's handwriting? Therefore, again, the Mishnah tells you, even Rebbe. Or maybe I can testify about my Rebbe's handwriting. Why? Because there's a certain level of reverence that a student has about his Rebbe, and therefore I'm going to make sure to tell the truth. But maybe that same level of reverence doesn't apply to a father. And maybe if it just said my father's handwriting, my Rebbe's handwriting, why? My father because I'm around my father, my Rebbe because I have reverence for my Rebbe. Aval ochiv. The less late. But my brother, I don't have reverence for my brother, and nor do I have fear of my brother. So, I should say differently. I don't have reverence or / fear of my brother, nor am I necessarily always around my brother, maybe I can't testify as to the validity of his signature. Kamash malano, kevan dikiyum shtaros b'dirabanan, heminu rabanan b'dirabanan. I will say, what's the basis of this? The concept of kiyum shtar. So I will say, midaraisa. If you have a shtar, and that shtar is signed, what's the halacha? You're good to go. The concept of kiyum shtars, of certifying documents, is a rabbinic concept. So because of that, the rabbis believed an adult to say, I recognize this signature from my childhood. Since certification of documents is rabbinic, the rabbis allowed this lower threshold for testimony as well. So therefore, again, pretty much, so case number one is, as an adult, I could testify that I recognize any of these signatures. My father, my Rebbe, my brother, from my childhood. Incredible. So the Gemara goes right there. The Gemara says, next case is I can testify as an adult that I remember as a child, Rachel, when she got married, she went out with her hair down wearing a veil, indicating that she is a basula. So the Gemara says, in my time, what's the reason for that? This is very interesting. The chazaka is that the majority of women who get married are basulos. So because of that, what I'm really testifying to is just an affirmation to what we believe to be the default. So therefore, again, that's why I'm believed to testify as an adult what I saw as a child. Incredible. Third case. I testify as an adult that I remember as a child, my friend Aaron from Cheder, right, would go ahead and leave Cheder early, cut school to go to the mikvah, right? He went ahead and he left Cheder to go to the mikvah, and then he went to eat truma. So the Gemara says, Vidilma Eved Koinu. Who says that makes Aaron a Kohen? Maybe he's what? Maybe he's an Eved of a Kohen. Because we'll say, what's the halacha? The servant, right? The Eved of a Kohen is permitted to eat truma as well. So truma, and we'll say, we just had this sugya. Truma consumption doesn't necessarily mean that a person is a Kohen. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Silber, Levi, Asuli Adam Sheilamed is Avdo Torah. So we'll say, no, because remember, where is Aaron? Where is Aaron before he's eating truma? Where is he? He's in Cheder, right? He's in school. So I will say, this reflects the Rabbi Silber. Rabbi Silber Levi holds that Allah Chalamaisa, you're not allowed to teach an Eved Torah. Can't teach an Eved Torah. Is that true? Vatanya, we learned, Lav Vahemeno Rabo, if a master borrowed money from his servant, Osha Asa Rabba Apotropis Amadeus, or the master went ahead and made his servant an apotropos. Or we'll say apotropos means he put him in charge of something, right? He put him in charge of his estate. Oshenyach tefillin bifnei Rabbo, or the Eved put on tefillin in front of his master. Oshekar shlosha psukim beis hakneses, or the Eved read 3 psukim in shul. Harei ze lo yatsa lacherus. Now, what's interesting is all of these things seem to be demonstrative of freedom, right? Borrowing money from someone, becoming an apotropos, putting on tefillin, being the Baal Koreh. These all look like the actions of a free man. So the Gemara just says, just because the Eved is doing these things does not automatically mean that he is a free man. Now, why is this important for us? Because one of the examples is what? He's reading 3 psukim. He's learning Torah. So you see that an Eved can't learn Torah. The Gemara says, no. Hasam de ikri Eved midaito. Ki aminon de kanog be. I'm sorry. Ki kaminon de kanog be minag banim. They will say in the Brisa, the Eved is just reading psukim on his own. When Rabbi Yehuda Ben Michal said that you can't teach an Eved Torah, that means is you can't enroll the Eved in yeshiva to actively teach him Torah. Ultimately, again, the way that a father would normally teach his sons. So therefore, I will say, in this case over here, where the childhood memory is that Aaron was in yeshiva with me. He was in yeshiva with me. He would leave yeshiva, go to the mikvah, eat truma. The fact that he's enrolled in yeshiva attests to the fact that what? He's not an Eved, in conformance with the view of Rabbi Yehuda Ben Levi, that you are not allowed to actively teach an Eved Torah the same way that one teaches their children Torah. Beautiful. Litbal le'achal truma. And again, he would go to the mikvah. Again, same case, right? Aaron would leave yeshiva. He'd go to the mikvah to teach truma. But truma d'Rabbanan. Now, I will say, so just to be clear, what does this testimony allow Aaron to continue to do? Teach truma d'Rabbanan. But also remember again, what you begin to see is that halacha l'maisa, this construct of an adult giving testimony based on things that he saw in his childhood only works for dinei d'Rabbanan. So therefore, based on this testimony, Aaron would be allowed to continue to eat truma. What kind of truma? Truma d'Rabbanan. And furthermore, again, I saw another case. I testify that as a child, Aaron used to come with us to the granary, to get truma. Once again, who says that means that Aaron is a Kohen? Maybe Aaron is the slave of a Kohen. And that's why he was at the granary getting truma. So the Gemara says, Tinan kimando amar in chol truma la'eved ele im kain rabo imar. Both say we had this sugya, right? We had this in Yevamis. Right? So we'll say this Mishnah reflects the opinion who says that halacha l'maisa we don't go ahead and give truma to an eved, not in the presence of. That's not good English. Right? We only give truma to an eved in the presence of his master. Rabbi say, why? What are we concerned about? Because if you give truma to an eved, not in the presence of his master, people may erroneously think that what? He's a free man. Right? He's a free man. Not as a free man. He's a Kohen. So therefore, Rabbi say, we never dispense truma to an eved if he's not with his master. Rabbi Yehuda holds we only dispense truma to an eved if he's with his master. Rabbi Yossi Omer Yachol Hu Sheyomar. Rabbi Yossi says not true. Right? If a guy shows up at the granary, he can say, "Listen, im Kohen ani tinuli b'shvili. If you believe me that I'm a Kohen, then give me truma because I'm a Kohen. B'shvil me v'im eved Kohen ani, and if you think that I'm a eved, tinuli b'shvil Rabbi." Then give me in the merit of my master. So we'll say, Rabbi Yossi says, so fundamental machlokes, Rabbi Yehuda says, we never give truma to an eved if he's not with his master. Rabbi Yossi says, yes we do. And I will say, this yields another very important chiluk. Listen to this. Rabbi will say, Rabbi Yehuda's locale, this is very important, Rabbi Yehuda's locale, if you ate truma, that was enough to certify your yichus. Which will say, now, and by the way, this all fits together. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says, you cannot give truma to an eved, not in the presence of his master. Because again, truma consumption was a certification for yichus. In the locale of Rabbi Yossi, I will say, then what? They would not, just because you ate truma, that was not enough to certify your yichus. So both an incredible story. We saw this all in Yevamis. So Tanya, Amr Rabbi Yossi, Miyamai Lohi Aditi. This is very true. Rabbi Yossi said, in general, I never gave testimony. And I will say that came from a concern that am I really able to convey objective truth? Because one time what happened? One time it happened, I gave testimony. So we're going to see what was the testimony about this type of situation. And as a result of my erroneous testimony, they certified an eved as a Kohen. One second. Really? That happened, that Rabbi Yossi gave incorrect testimony, and as a result they made an eved into a Kohen, to which the Gemara says, I would say, if even the animals of tzaddikim, Hashem doesn't allow averos to be committed through them. Rashi says, this is the This was the donkey of Rav Pinchas ben Yair. Most of the donkey of Rav Pinchas ben Yair would not eat untithed produce. Incredible. We're not eating untithed. So I'll say, if averos don't happen through the animals of tzaddikim, then certainly what? Averos don't happen through tzaddikim themselves. Tzaddikim asal kol shekain. Elabikshu lalos evlakunapi. Rather, we'll say what happened. Rabbi Yossi said it almost happened that as a result of my testimony, they made an eved into a Kohen. What happened? I will say, I'll tell you what happened. So the Gemara says, Chaza ba'asher Rabbi Yossi, va'azal ba'asher ba'asher Rabbi Yehuda. Watch this. So let's say, here's what happened. Rabbi Yossi said like this. I was in the city of Rabbi Yossi. And I saw a guy getting truma. Then I traveled to the city of Rabbi Yehuda. They asked me about this guy. And halacha l'maisa, I said, I saw him getting truma. So I'll say, watch this. In the city of Rabbi Yossi, they would dispense truma to even who? Avadim even if they weren't in the presence of their master. Why? Because the city of Rabbi Yossi, they did not take truma consumption to be a certification of one's yichus. So sure, you're never a coin, here you go. So I will say, so that's what Rabbi Yossi saw. That's what he saw. But then he gave us information in the city of Rabbi Yehuda. But in the city of Rabbi Yehuda, I will say, what was the halacha? They would not dispense truma to an eved not in the presence of his master. Why? Because in the city of Rabbi Yehuda, they used truma consumption as certification for yichus. So Rabbi says, so because of that, when he comes to the city of Rabbi Yehuda and he says, I saw Aaron going ahead and eating truma. Okay, so I'm eating truma. Truma is enough of a certification for yichus, and they were ready to declare Aaron a Kohen. Even though Aaron was really what? Aaron was really an Eved. I would say, so again, just absolutely fantastic. I will say, it's also an incredible musar. Because I will say, during these days, when our primary goal is to go ahead and work on sinas chinam, and to go ahead, not work on bettering sinas chinam, but rather work on avoiding sinas chinam, right? To go ahead and really work on our avas chinam. I will say, so many times relationship friction is caused because people see things in different ways, and people are dealing with two different sets of circumstances, two different sets of realities. Isn't it incredible? It's the same case over here. It's the same case. It's the same Aaron eating truma. Just the difference is, in the locale of Rabbi Yossi, that's a meaningless act, so to speak. And in the locale of Rabbi Yehuda, it's a powerfully important act. Same act, just two different perspectives. We have to train ourselves. Just because we see things in a certain way, does not mean everyone else sees it that way, nor does it mean that that's the unequivocal truth. And if we're able to work on ourselves to recognize that there are other perspectives, there are other points of view, there are other ways of viewing even the most important of issues, then we run a real possibility of creating meaningful Abbas within Klal Yisrael. So we'll stop over here for today. Shkoyach.